Hi, this is Jason Leahy, Executive Director of the Illinois Principals Association. Thank you for joining us for this IPA Talk, the Government Relations Edition. Today's date is May 26, 2020. So with me today, I've got Brian Schwartz, our Deputy Executive Director and General Counsel at the Association, as well as Allison Maley, Government Public Relations Director. So we're going to recap what happened during a very truncated session of the General Assembly this past week as they came into town. Really only met for 4 days. The House at the BOS Center, the Voss Center here in town, so that they could spread out social distance on the floor, as well as the Senate that did meet at the Capitol. So thanks, Brian and Allison, for spending a little time with me as we continue to social distance, right?
Yeah, right.
So I think, Brian, just to note here, I think the thing that we'll learn out of this is everybody's going to want to come to your house to play Pac-Man and everything else you got on that machine there behind you.
Everyone's welcome as long as we stay 6 feet apart. So
that's terrific. Well, I'm lined up out the door. So let's get right into it from the dollars and cents perspective. Let's talk about the budget, Allison. So can you talk a little bit about session and just what we saw with the budget from the state?
Yeah, definitely a unique session as we are living in these unique times. So as you mentioned, the two chambers were meeting separately in different buildings. Members of the public and lobbyists were allowed to enter both of those buildings, but there were quite a few restrictions on what you could do. I think if you went to the BOS Center, you were not allowed to bring any laptops or purses or anything like that. I'm not sure you can even use your cell phone. So really, if you wanted to get anything done, you might as well stay at home, which is, I think, what most people did. So I was monitoring at home as well as many others. So really what it came down to was, as we kind of anticipated, really a flat budget for education and many other aspects of the state budget. So in terms of education spending, again, so flat funding. There's no new dollars for tier funding for the evidence-based model. There's about another $1 million just to kind of make sure that in case there's any kind of gaps in making sure that every district receives the same amount and is held harmless. There's a little bit of a buffer there. A little bit more in special education funding. There's some district intervention money that was put into the formula for East St. Louis School District and North Chicago School District that are under district intervention. But beyond that, there's really nothing above and beyond what we saw from last year. So we were kind of anticipating that, and that's what we ended up seeing out of the state budget overall.
So with the economic realities of the state, though, I think it's probably about best case scenario for education. Yeah, and I think, the thing that it's all predicated upon is this loan from the Federal Reserve. So about a $5 billion loan coming from the feds. I think the idea is that, we hope that it will either be forgiven at some point or that hole will be filled with maybe an additional package from the federal government to help out states and municipalities, recovering from the results of COVID-19.
Well, I know there's some trepidation about that, but it's going to be needed. And, unfortunately or fortunately, I guess kind of however you want to look at this, every state in the union is going to be contending, with large holes with regards to revenues in their state budgets. And so we're all going to need a big assist from the feds moving forward. And it feels like, from what you're hearing from Senate President, Mitch McConnell, that maybe we're starting to see a little bit of a warming to, the next relief bill. I don't like the term stimulus package or bailout or whatever. This is a relief bill to help us continue to contend with what's happening. And the other thing I think is important to note here too, Allison, that this doesn't incorporate CARES Act funding that's already been passed and approved and is working to move on to districts. I mean, those are additional dollars that school districts have to, deal with the realities of the pandemic, correct?
Right. And I'm trying to think if it was in the BIP or the budget itself, but it does allow the state board to then allocate those funds. So it gives them the appropriation authority to allocate those funds to school districts. And I think there's a little bit of a sliver that goes to the state board that they can use as well. But majority of that money does go to school districts based on their Title I funding. Which they're definitely going to need. Right.
As we look at, working with kids now as well as planning for the fall. Great. Well, let's move on here. Let's talk about, there's a big omnibus education bill that passed, dealt with codification of the governor's executive orders. So who's taking this one?
Well, it was quite the bill, over 250 pages. But Allison, as we kind of reviewed the drafts of it and then the final version, it really seems to a large extent to codify the governor's orders dealing with remote instruction, and then heading into the fall, borrowing a term from higher ed, looking at possibly doing blended learning where kids utilize technology but actually physically come to school part of the day as well.
Yeah. And I think there wasn't just one omnibus bill dealing with education. There were several dealing with other aspects of the state government. So because they were on such a shortened timeline, it's really kind of just makes sense to kind of fit everything into one bill if they possibly can. So that's really where we ended up with one bill that does a lot of different things. So,
and I like the fact that they provided maximum flexibility and maximum control to districts to determine what their needs will be during the fall, depending on where we're at in terms of remote learning.
Mm-hmm. Well, and if those districts that already had e-learning plans that were approved by the state and approved by their local regional offices, they can continue to use those. But it really lays out the parameters for what remote learning, blended learning will look like should we need it in the future.
Right. And then it also looked like there were some changes dealing with student instructional mandates going back to school. The physical education mandates, certainly to the extent that we're under a governor stay-home order, would be waived. But it looked to me like the rest of the mandates were still substantially in effect, though that any testing could be administered remotely.
Yeah, I think in particular, they really kind of zero in on the Constitution test and the Constitution related tests that 8th graders and then high schoolers would need to take. So those can be administered remotely. But yeah, pretty much everything else kind of remains intact. And even in those situations, I believe it's with the understanding that we are in a disaster declaration due to a public health emergency. But really beyond that, the like you said, codifying a lot of the emergency actions that the governor took, especially for high school seniors, making sure that they can continue to graduate and have their diploma verified, that even though they may have been, stopped in March, that those graduation requirements for the remainder of the year were waived. And then anything that shows up on their transcript as far as like a pass or a complete or a satisfactory on their transcript or on their diplomas is good for moving on to higher ed or wherever they end up next.
Right. Really making sure that we're not disadvantaging kids moving forward. Yes.
Well, I think the flexibility is the optimum word there. I mean, even, with the requirements still being in place for assessments, like for Constitution or whatever, there are various ways, even in a remote setting, to be able to assess for competency related to those. And so, I would say, as long as school districts are making best faith efforts, with regards to those items, or have it by this point, in a lot of cases, I know there'll be still a few districts that are rolling into June. As long as good faith efforts have been made to cover those things, I think we're going to be okay with that. Let's talk a little bit about teacher licensure, unless there's anything else on those items we need to take into account. We know that there was some modifications made to the professional educator license, particularly for those that have their license up here at the end of June. So, Brian, you want to chat with us a little bit about that?
Sure. So for individuals whose licenses are up for renewal June 30th, 2020, you will have an extra year to get all of your administrator academies, professional development, and other requirements met. Now, we don't know if that will start you on a new 5-year cycle or whether or not you'll have an abbreviated 4-year cycle moving forward. That will all be dependent, as much of this will be on the state board's rules, but at least with not as many professional development opportunities being available, that individuals will have another year to get those requirements met.
So obviously we're going to have to be waiting then for ISB to let us know likely, what the parameters will be for that, correct?
We're correct.
Yeah. And I think it's important to note here as well, just as we're talking about licensure, that the state board is currently working through some updates to the Ellis and IAM systems there. And so it is putting a little bit of a hiccup with regards to data entry for administrator academies and things. And I know they're hard at work on that. But, as we continue to offer academies, we're doing the best that we can, working with the state board to make sure that that stuff gets entered in. But as long as people, get their professional development done now, at least those that maybe aren't up, for renewal this year, as long as they're getting their PD done by the end of June, they're going to be okay, even if that stuff doesn't get recorded into those systems. So I felt like just wanted to share that and reaffirm that since we're talking a little bit about licensure as well for educators in general. But we also have that little bit happening here with regards to student teachers, new teachers, some flexibility added for that. So what are we looking at for those individuals?
Yeah, for student teachers, so those that are in just this semester only for spring 2020, those individuals are waived out of their student teaching experience, or those that needed an internship for other certifications, those are all waived. And then going forward, again, in the event of a disaster declaration due to a public health emergency, student teachers could complete that remotely. So that allows, in case we're ever in this situation again, hopefully not, but it allows for that sort of flexibility for those folks to continue on with their education and continue observing and participating in classes in that manner.
So I think what's equally as important is that although the internships and the student teaching requirements are waived, the professional licensure tests and subject matter endorsement tests are not waived.
Right.
So if an individual is in a position where they couldn't complete one of those requirements, they would need to apply to the state board for a temporary extension, which is along with a $50 processing fee will be approved by the state.
Very good. Well, we'll see when those things will be available. I know driver's license facilities are starting to open up here just a little bit, so we'll see, what happens with those facilities as well, where those tests can be taken. Now, kind of tangential to looking at licensure to a certain extent is, teacher evaluation. And we know a little bit was done with that for those individuals in this year. And if I remember right, I know we're still trying to unpack everything, and we were dealing with some big omnibus bills, but even something that could affect us moving forward as well. So anybody want to kind of walk us through what's happened and where we're going with teacher eval?
So I'll take that one real quickly. With teachers who are on remediation plans for a final summative evaluation of unsatisfactory, those remediation plans are paused. And when we come back to in-person instruction, we'll have to look at where each of those remediation plans are at. If there are more than 45 days left in the plan, those plans would start over. If there are less than 45 days, those days would start over. More than 45 days, that plan would continue with the resumption of in-person learning.
And so that would be whenever in-person learnings would start then next year, correct, Ryan? Yeah, yes. So with regards to proficient versus excellence, right? So if I remember correctly, for those individuals who were not able to finish their evaluation this last year, obviously it typically defaults to proficient, correct? But if they had an excellent in the previous year, they would still be able to do that, correct? Or receive that excellent rating moving forward.
That's right.
Okay, very good. Last thing then with regards to teacher eval, it appears that some language was included that will make it such that if we're still remote learning next year, that remote learning would not be allowed to for the evaluation process. So you couldn't do like a formal evaluation of remote learning and that count towards the evaluation of a teacher, correct?
Correct. I think, and Alison, I'll let you speak to this, but I think the presumption would be it would be too difficult to do an accurate formal or informal observation during remote learning.
Yeah, I think that's a good summary of the concern I think that folks were having out in the field.
Yeah, very good. All right. Well, it's obviously been a busy 4 days there here in Springfield. They got a lot done in a short period of time. I know members were meeting, in subject matter groups and in their caucuses even leading up to the session. But we know that ISB still got to make some decisions based on what occurred here these past several days. But anything else just top of mind from each of you when we look at this last session that we need to be sure to let people know about?
And the only thing I can think of is that, for this election, this upcoming election only, schools, there would be a legal state holiday for the November 2020 election. So it would allow schools to close for attendance anyway. It does make schools, since we're using this word essential all the time, an essential polling place for those local election authorities, especially with the concern about having election polling places at nursing homes and assisted living facilities, those types of places where they currently do take place. So if we're shifting away from those types of facilities, having schools still available as an option, I think will be important. So that may be something where our principals may still have to be in the building just to kind of make sure that everything's, working smoothly. But otherwise, students and teachers and staff would not have to be in attendance on those days or on that day.
Very good. Yep. No, that's good to know and be prepared for, because we may even see, because of the nursing home situation that we've seen across the state, we may see school districts people may reach out to them to be a place for that in lieu of the other facilities. So that's good to note.
So if you don't mind, I'll just add that all of this, of course, is contingent upon the governor's presumptive signing of both the budget and the omnibus bill, and then a lot of flexibility for the state board to develop rules based on conditions this fall. So that's something that we'll take very involved in.
Absolutely. Well, and I know that the state board has been working closely with a stakeholder group right now to provide some transition guidance. I know that they've provided some to help wrap up this year, as well as look at what the summer will bring. But I know that they're working feverishly to try to get something put together for us to have available for the fall, so that school districts, who I know are already thinking about this, we can have that available for planning purposes. So Brian Schwartz, Allison Maley, appreciate you guys Zooming with me. We don't get enough of those right now, right? But thanks for the insight there for what happened for session here these last few days. And I think all things considered, we're pretty grateful for the way things shook out for us as we look at the school year ahead. So my name is Jason Leahy, Executive Director for IPA. Thanks for joining us for this IPA Talk. As always, if there's anything that the association can do for you, don't hesitate to reach out with a call. Somebody is picking up the phone, believe it or not, during this time of social distancing. Or you can always find us on the web at ilprincipals.org. Take care.